We return to simple systematic theology, and as I prayed, we are endeavoring to plumb the depths of God's boundless infinity. So you'll recall the definition of an attribute, that it is the one infinite perfection of God as it's made known to us under various inadequate concepts. And we tried to open up these concepts by asking questions about the attributes. So the first was, which are the attributes of essence? They answer the question, what? Then last time we considered the attributes of quantity, measuring God, so to speak, again, through inadequate, finite concepts by which he's pleased to make himself known. So we considered his unity, that in the concept of number, he's one. His infinity, that he is boundless. His quantity regarding presence or space, he's omnipresent and immense, that is exceeding the boundaries of all measurable space. And then that he is, in regard to time, eternal. We turn now to his attributes of quality. As you'll see, this is a longer answer, and there are more attributes to consider, so we'll split them up, not taking them quite in the same order, but dealing in the three categories that are laid out here with the first and the third, and we'll come back to the second next time. So I'll read the whole question. Which are God's attributes of quality? God's attributes of quality are those of intellect, as omniscience, of will, as goodness, holiness, righteousness, wrath, love, grace, and mercy, and of operations, as omnipotence. So the question we're asking now regards God's quality. We're asking, what is he like? And here we'll be particularly comparing him to our common experience of men, that men have in their souls an intellect that does the understanding, the thinking, and he has a will in which he does the choosing and in which he exercises the affections. We'll consider God's affections. That will be next time. But then third, the operations, coming from the intellect and the will, what the actual works that God does. So under the inadequate concept of human works, we consider God's omnipotence. So as I said, we'll take the first category and the third, the attributes of intellect, and the third, those of operations. Consider first then God's attributes of intellect. If we were to consider God's mind under the concept of the human mind, what can we say about God? Well, first, regarding his knowledge, he is omniscient. To put it in a more English phrase, he knows all things. He knows all things. Now, we can turn to Romans 11, 33 and 34. We considered verse 36 recently. Now we go back to consider in particular God's knowledge. Verse 33, oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and his ways past finding out. For who hath known the mind of the Lord, or who hath been his counselor? We hear of God's wisdom, knowledge, judgments, and his mind. These are speaking of God's intellect, as it were. Now, omniscience means he knows all things that there can be to know, God knows. The extent of this knowledge is what we call wisdom, or regarding the perfection, rather, of this knowledge is what we call wisdom. He not only knows all things, he knows all the connections of all things, and he knows all the proper applications of all things. The easiest definition I know of wisdom is that it is the perfection of knowledge. So God has omniscience and he has wisdom. Now I want to make a distinction here, and I put the terms on your handout. This will help you plumb the depths of God's wisdom. and knowledge. Theologians speak of two types of knowledge of God, his natural knowledge and his free knowledge. God's natural knowledge is the things that he has simply by being God. It's his nature to know them. And that's the knowledge of all things that are necessary or possible. The only truly necessary thing is God. God cannot not exist, so he knows himself. And he knows all things in and through himself. But God also knows all possible things, all things that could exist without denying God. So this doesn't include impossible things like a square circle, because that would not only be a contradiction, which is not a thing, it would be against God, because God would have to have two things in his mind that disagree. God would have to have a contradiction in his own mind to have a square that is also a circle. And God cannot lie, so that's impossible. But possible things, all things that could, in their own nature, exist, he knows. That is different than actual things. Do you know there are 10,000 possible worlds God could have made but this one? He knows every single one of them, and all the hundreds of thousands more besides. He knows all the things he could have chose to create, and all the providence he could have chose to plan and bring to pass, but didn't. He knows, think of in your life, all the results of all the decisions you did not make. He knows all the choices, the hard choices you made in life, how it would have gone if you had done the other thing that you were deliberating about. He knows that. He chose for you to choose the things you chose. But he knew exactly how it could go. He gives an example of David, of this when David is at Keilah and he comes to the Lord and says, "Will the men of Keilah deliver me up into the hand of the Philistines?" And God says, "Yes, they will." Well, that was a warning for David to flee, and it turns out they didn't. But God knew what would have happened if David stayed. He has a natural knowledge of all necessary and possible things. His free knowledge, then, is of all those possible things, he knows the things he freely chose to bring to pass. He knows all actual and future things. He also knows all hypothetical things within the nature that he did chose to bring to pass. So I blurred those two things. We don't have to get too detailed. But all the things that would happen according to the things that he brought to pass could properly come under his free knowledge. But I think if you just understand this basic distinction, it will help you plumb the depths of God's knowledge. He has a free knowledge of all things that he did choose to bring to pass. But he also has this vast ocean of natural knowledge of all the things that are merely possible and never will exist. So that should help us. I given two other terms, his truthfulness and faithfulness, and these things flow from his knowledge. God knows all truth, and he tells all truth, and he will always keep all of his promises. If we would speak of a human mind as being accurate and truth-telling, then we can all the more speak of the divine mind that way. Well, that's God's attributes of intellect. In one word, omniscience, and then I tried to give some other words to help you understand it. We turn to his operations, skipping for now over his will. God's attributes of operations are, in one word, omnipotence. God is all powerful. He is able to do all things. And just like with knowing all things, he's only able to do all things that are possible in themselves. Because again, God cannot contradict himself. Just as he cannot think of a square circle because he'd have a lie in his mind, he cannot make a square circle because he would be telling a lie, so to speak. It's not even in itself possible. God cannot contradict himself. Think of the question, can God sin? No, because he would be denying his own self, which is in his very definition not to do. And that's not saying God is weak. That's actually underlying his strength. God having no ability to sin is one of the things that makes him great and awesome. So God is omnipotent, all-powerful. And just as we saw a distinction between his natural and his free knowledge, so here we see a similar distinction between his absolute and his ordained power. Remember, his natural knowledge is of all necessary and possible things, and his free knowledge of all actual things. When we come to his absolute and ordained power, his absolute power is his power to do all those possible things. The power to make those 10,000 worlds that he did not make. How hard, so to speak, would it be for God to have made all those worlds? No harder than making this one. He could do it now, if he willed. We have no reason to think that he will. He's revealed to us his will to make this one world, and here we are. But God could. He has an absolute power to do all possible things. This was spoken to us, if you remember the sermon I preached in Ephesians 3, verse 20, of how God is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. Do you remember that? Understanding his absolute power helps us grasp just how exceeding that power is. But then his ordained power is his power to do all his holy will. That is, all those things that in his free knowledge he knows that he will do because he chose them. His ordained power does do and powerfully brings them to pass, so that there is never any frustration or failure moving from his free knowledge to his ordained power. Everything he plans, he does. And that's exactly what we learn in Psalm 115, verse 3. Our God is in the heavens. He hath done whatsoever he hath pleased. No man can stay his hand. Well, thus God's attributes of intellect and his omniscience and operations in his omnipotence. Let's apply this. First, this brings us a wholesome application of self-examination, particularly from God's omniscience. David in Psalm 139 is professing his sincerity before God. O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. And he speaks then of the all-knowing God. We saw in the previous time how he, in the same psalm, speaks of the everywhere present God, but it applies it to his knowledge. So, verse 4, or verse 2, thou knowest my downsitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. We have trouble knowing our own thoughts. God knows them from afar off. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. Speaking there of his free knowledge of the words he himself has planned to come to pass in our own mouth before we say them. We could go on to verses 15 to 18 of God's knowledge of us even in our mother's womb. And we could then see this applied in verse 23 and 24. To this God who is able to search the hearts, the depths, the womb, all places, he says, search me, O God, and know my heart. And this is your duty as well, to come to the omniscient God and to ask, so to speak, to borrow his infinite knowledge so that you might do the task impossible in your own strength, to know your own heart, which is deceitful above all things. This should give you confidence that you can do that. God, who knows your heart, who made your heart, he's able to help you see your heart. So ask his help as David did. Next, the second and final application is to trust the Lord. I want to give you a model here of using the attributes for your comfort and encouragement. There are 4 attributes here regarding God's knowledge in the terms I gave you, and each one is a powerful reason to trust him. So you can trust his omniscience, for example, for your vindication. If you are in trouble, distress, persecution, if you are beset by many and very evil foes, this should be a comfort to you. 2 Chronicles 16:9. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth. Just think about that for a moment. What a condescending image. God doesn't have eyes. He speaks to us of his perfect knowledge, which he has simply by knowing himself without having to look for things. But he speaks of it in terms of how we have to learn by looking. His eyes run to and fro through the whole earth to show himself strong in behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward him. Notice this. God's omniscience will not miss your just cause. An earthly judge will overlook many just causes, but God cannot. He sees. He knows. Take comfort. Take comfort in God's wisdom for his provision. So when Joseph is dealing with his brothers, they've repented, but they're afraid. They know their own hearts and how they might want to take vengeance, and, well, they're concerned that Joseph might as well. But he tells them not to worry because they meant it for evil. There's a godly brotherly rebuke, but God meant it for good. What marvelous wisdom that God can use wretched sin to bring about such an excellent reconciliation from sin, as we see in that family, and the deliverance of an entire region of the world, including the people of God, from death by famine. Marvelous wisdom, how God in his knowledge knew how to weave all those threads together in such a perfect tapestry. That's an encouragement to you in provision. If he took care of Egypt and Joseph's family, don't think that he doesn't know how to take care of you. Faithfulness, that God will do all that he's promised for fulfillment. He will not fail in his promises. 2 Corinthians 1:20. For all the promises of God in him are yea, and in him amen, unto the glory of God by us. Think about how impossible it is for God to say something and not do it. He'd have to stop being God. That would mean he'd have to have something that he planned to do in his free knowledge, looking at the future that he had planned, saying, I will do that, but then when it comes to it, he forgets. It's not possible. God doesn't change. His knowledge cannot change. Certainly his power will never change. And that should then help us when we move to the attributes of operations to consider his omnipotence, that he will powerfully fulfill all his promises, including the deliverance of his people. Do you remember those 3 young men about to be put in the fiery furnace? Daniel 3:17. What was their comfort? If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. Think for a moment. Are they speaking of his absolute or ordained power? Absolute, with the hope that it will indeed be his ordained power. But they say, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king, but if not, be it known unto thee, we will not serve thy gods. Obviously speaking of his absolute power, because they don't know what he's ordained. But they have no concern, because they're in his almighty hands. If you are trusting Christ, so are you. May the Lord bless these things to us. Let's pray.